I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Um, you are earning $100,000 a year.
Which is a huge milestone for a lot of people.
Right, exactly. For a
Yeah.
vast majority of the country, that is like the psychological finish line. It's the six-figure milestone where you finally feel like, you've made it. You've got the impressive job title, the solid paycheck, all the outward markers of success.
Yeah, you look great on paper.
Totally. But then you look at your checking account the Thursday before payday, and your stomach just drops. Because despite that top-tier salary, you are living entirely paycheck to paycheck.
And that is a terrifying feeling.
It really is. On the surface, it sounds like there must be some, I don't know, massive mathematical error happening, right? Because a six-figure income should equal financial security. But the reality is this dynamic is just incredibly common.
Yeah, it's a really pervasive silent struggle. I mean, on paper or on a LinkedIn profile, that person is incredibly successful. But in the day-to-day reality, they are walking this stressful financial tightrope. They're managing severe cash flow anxiety and constantly wondering where all of that income is actually evaporating to.
Because it just disappears.
Exactly. We culturally equate a high income with wealth. We sort of assume that financial distress is strictly a low-income problem, but the data tells a completely different story about how money actually behaves once it hits our bank accounts.
And that behavioral gap is the exact mission of our deep dive today. We're exploring the core concepts inside this piece called Why Most Americans Stay Broke. And I want to set the parameters clearly right out of the gate here. The goal isn't to sit around and make you feel guilty about buying a latte or, paying for a streaming service.
Right, definitely no guilt trips today.
Yeah, this is about uncovering the underlying mechanics of personal finance. We're going to examine why a high income absolutely does not automatically generate wealth, and more importantly, the specific structural steps you can implement to actually keep the money you earn. So, okay, let's unpack this, because I promise you this isn't going to be some dense, jargon-heavy lecture on tax codes.
No, not at all. We are diving straight into dismantling a foundational myth. From a really early age, the accepted narrative is that earning more money acts as this, universal cure for financial stress.
Right, like if you have a money problem, just make more money.
Exactly. The logic seems sound, right?
Yeah.
If you're short on cash, get a better job, negotiate a raise, and your money problems will naturally resolve themselves.
But they don't.
They don't. The source text illustrates how an increase in income without a deliberate system in place often just scales up the exact same financial problems you already had.
Yeah, and the source labels that phenomenon lifestyle inflation. And it operates like this invisible tax on your ambition.
That's a great way to put it.
The core mechanism of lifestyle inflation is that your baseline spending increases in total lockstep with your income. So you secure that big promotion.
Congratulations.
Right, but then the very next week, you decide, well, it's time to lease a more expensive car. You upgrade to a luxury apartment in a highly desirable zip code. You normalize spending like $200 on a casual Friday night dinner because in your mind you can afford it now.
And the psychology driving those decisions is fascinating because every single one of those purchases feels completely rational in the moment.
Because you worked hard for it.
Exactly. You tell yourself that your hard work deserves a tangible reward. But the mathematical reality is that your fixed overhead is growing at the exact same velocity as your new paycheck.
Which leaves you with nothing left over.
Right. The actual vehicle for wealth creation is the margin. That gap between your net income and your mandatory expenses. When you inflate your lifestyle, that margin never expands. You are taking a larger volume of money and
funneling it right out the door.
Literally funneling it directly out the door to different vendors.
And that perfectly explains why highly compensated professionals, physicians, corporate executives, senior engineers, why they can still find themselves completely financially cornered.
Oh, absolutely.
To illustrate the mechanics of this, the source presents this brilliant comparison between two case studies, Sarah and John. So Sarah earns $60,000 a year, but she intentionally engineers her life to operate well below her means. She captures 20% of her gross income, directs it into investments, rigidly avoids consumer debt, and just allows those assets to compound silently.
It's a very methodical, almost invisible approach to capital allocation.
Yeah, exactly. Then you look at John. John is pulling in $150,000 a year.
A massive top-line advantage.
Right. But John chooses to finance luxury vehicles. He heavily curates a designer wardrobe, carries a rolling balance on multiple credit cards, and consequently his savings rate is essentially zero.
It's all going to lifestyle maintenance.
So you fast forward a decade, and you look at their net worth. Instinctively, our culture tells us John is the wealthy one. But the math proves it's Sarah. The text really hammers this point. Home wealth is determined exclusively by the capital you retain, not the capital that simply passes through your hands.
That is the defining metric.
I do want to push back on behalf of the listener, though. Looking at Sarah and John, it's incredibly difficult not to feel a bit defensive. I mean, isn't it just a fundamental component of human nature to want to visibly experience the fruits of your labor?
Of course it is.
You endure the 60-hour work weeks, you secure the promotion, you want to feel that victory in your daily life. To me, lifestyle inflation feels less like a conscious mistake and more like running on a treadmill. You manually bump up the speed, that's you hustling and earning more money, but you never actually move forward in the room because the belt representing your expenses accelerates underneath you.
You're just running faster in place.
Yeah, you're sweating more, you're exhausted, but you are stuck in the exact same spot.
That treadmill analogy captures the physical exhaustion of the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle perfectly. And what's fascinating here is the societal conditioning that keeps people sprinting on that belt.
Oh, the pressure is immense.
It really is. The text dives into why someone like John prioritizes the luxury car. We are systematically trained by our environment to confuse the appearance of wealth with actual structural wealth.
Yes, the optics of money.
Right. When a neighbor pulls up in a $100,000 SUV, our immediate cognitive shortcut is to label them as rich. But a financial statement would reveal that they either have $100,000 less in liquidity or they are servicing a massive debt obligation.
This is usually the case.
Exactly. True wealth is fundamentally invisible. It's the unspent capital sitting in Sarah's brokerage account. It's the absence of a car payment. You cannot see a high savings rate when someone walks down the street.
And if the sheer velocity of the treadmill, right, the size of the paycheck, isn't the primary engine of that invisible wealth, the fuel has to be what you are actually doing with the retained capital. Because Sarah didn't win that 10-year race by just stuffing her 20% savings under a floorboard.
No, inflation would have eaten that alive.
Right. She leveraged the core mechanism that our audience is certainly familiar with, which is compound interest.
The source relies heavily on the mechanics of compounding. It really is the gravitational force of wealth building. The text uses that classic analogy of planting a shade tree.
Right. The best time to plant it was 20 years ago.
Exactly. To get the maximum benefit, you plant the sapling as early as possible and just let time handle the heavy lifting.
Now, our listeners obviously know what compound interest is. We've all seen those dramatic hockey stick graphs where the line just shoots straight up.
Yeah.
But what I appreciate about how this text frames the concept is that it highlights the behavioral tax of waiting.
The cost of doing nothing.
Yeah, it uses a very grounded mathematical model, investing just $500 a month starting at age 25 versus delaying that exact same behavior until age 35.
And the output of that calculation always underscores the disproportionate value of early capital.
It's wild. It fundamentally changes how heavy a lift retirement becomes. That simple 10-year delay doesn't just reduce your final number by the $60,000 you didn't invest.
No, it's so much worse than that.
Right. The text shows it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars in foregone compound growth by the time you reach retirement age. The core takeaway isn't just, math is magic. It's that time is a vastly more potent variable than the actual principal investment itself.
Time's doing all the work.
But looking at the sheer scale of that 10-year gap, I have to ask a structural question for the listener. If someone is tuning in right now and they are 35 or 45, seeing that math usually triggers a really deep sense of regret.
Oh, panic even.
Yeah, it feels like missing the starting gun entirely. How does the text reframe this reality for the late starter who feels like the math is just already mathematically stacked against them?
The psychological friction of starting late is a massive barrier. People look at that missed decade and they use it as a justification to abandon the strategy entirely. Like, oh, I'm already behind, why bother?
Exactly. Throwing their hands up.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the functional mechanics of compounding remain identical whether you are 25 or 50. Time is still the engine. Your capital earns a return, and then those returns begin generating their own returns, creating that snowball effect.
The math doesn't change based on your birth year.
Right. Now, if you have a 20-year runway instead of a 40-year runway, yes, the angle of your ascent needs to be steeper. You may need to allocate a higher percentage of your income, but the absolute worst behavioral choice is allowing the friction of past inaction to prevent you from planting the tree today. The math still works. It just requires more fuel.
And that brings us to the nature of the fuel itself. Because John, from our earlier example, he might actually think he is planting trees.
Oh, he probably assumes he's doing great.
Right. The source points out that high earners frequently misclassify their spending. They confuse things that mimic wealth-building tools with things that actively erode their net worth. And this centers on a really ruthlessly simple definition of assets versus liabilities.
Yeah, the text strips away all the complex accounting theory and gives us this purely cash flow-centric framework, which I love. An asset is an instrument that systematically puts money into your pocket.
Period.
Period. A liability is an obligation that continuously pulls money out of your pocket.
It is incredibly clarifying to look at your life through that specific lens.
It really is. It immediately changes how you evaluate purchases. So a dividend-paying index fund or a rental property with positive monthly cash flow, those are undeniable assets.
Money flows in.
Exactly. Conversely, a boat, a primary residence that stretches your budget to the absolute breaking point, or a financed vehicle, those are liabilities. They require constant infusions of your capital for maintenance, insurance, interest, and depreciation.
Money flows out.
Always. And the text makes a defining observation about financial class behavior here. People who build wealth acquire assets first, and they let the income from those assets fund their lifestyle. People who stay broke acquire liabilities first and just hope their primary income will always be enough to service the drain.
That is such a crucial distinction. And the most dangerous liability the text covers brings us to the nuance of debt. Now, the source doesn't treat all debt as this monolithic evil. It acknowledges that leveraging a mortgage for an affordable property or, securing a sensible business loan, that can be strategic.
Sure, that's leverage.
But it aggressively targets high-interest consumer debt, specifically credit cards.
The mechanics of high-interest debt represent compound interest operating in reverse.
That is a terrifying thought.
It is. Instead of your capital snowballing to your benefit, your obligations are snowballing to the benefit of the issuing bank.
The source uses such a visceral analogy here. Attempting to build wealth while carrying a 22% interest rate on a credit card balance is like trying to run a marathon while wearing a backpack loaded with bricks.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Right. The math mathematically neutralizes your income generation. You essentially have to earn $1.22 just to pay for $1 of past consumption. Taking off that backpack by aggressively eliminating high-interest debt isn't just a good idea. It is the absolute prerequisite to making your money work for you.
You cannot outinvest a 22% interest rate.
No, you can't. Here's where it gets really interesting, though, and I want to push back on the liability framework, specifically regarding cars.
Okay, let's hear it.
It is incredibly easy to label a car a liability on a spreadsheet. But in the real world, people require transportation. You need a vehicle to commute to the job that generates the income in the first place.
Right, it's a utility.
Exactly. So how does the text guide a listener in drawing the line between a necessary infrastructural tool for daily life and a liability that is actively cannibalizing their wealth?
That distinction is exactly where lifestyle inflation usually hides. If we connect this to the bigger picture of auto financing, the danger isn't the physical car.
Okay.
The danger is the modern financing structure of depreciating assets. The text clarifies that a reliable, previously owned vehicle that gets you safely from point A to point B, that is a legitimate, necessary utility expense.
So the car itself isn't the enemy.
Right. The wealth-killing trap opens when someone secures a raise and immediately translates that into an $800 monthly payment on a brand new luxury vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
Furthermore, we now see auto loans stretching from 36 months to 72 or even 84 months, just to manipulate the monthly payment into looking affordable.
7-year car loans are insane.
They are. You aren't just buying a car at that point. You are locking up a massive percentage of your future cash flow and surrendering the opportunity cost of what that $800 a month could have done in an investment account over 7 years.
Okay, so we have mapped out the structural traps here. We see how the lifestyle inflation treadmill works. We understand the cognitive load of carrying that high-interest backpack of bricks. And we know the definitions of compounding assets versus depreciating liabilities.
We've diagnosed the problem.
Exactly. But Theory without execution is completely useless. The text transitions into a highly pragmatic step-by-step game plan. It outlines an everyday wealth playbook to completely re-engineer your cash flow.
Yeah, the playbook relies on 5 systematic directives.
Okay, lay them on us.
The first is non-negotiable. You have to track where your money goes.
Because of that leaky cash flow we talked about.
Exactly. High earners often suffer from leaky cash flow. Hundreds of dollars bleeding out through forgotten subscriptions, daily conveniences, and just untracked discretionary spending. You cannot optimize a system if you lack data on how it currently operates.
Makes total sense.
The second step is to establish a realistic monthly budget.
The key word there being realistic. A budget shouldn't be a financial straitjacket. It is simply capital allocation.
It's giving your money directions.
Yeah, it's giving every single dollar a specific job description before the month even begins, which entirely removes that in-the-moment decision fatigue.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third step in the playbook, which is building an emergency fund that covers 3 to 6 months of baseline living expenses.
Which feels like a lot of cash just sitting there.
It does, but that emergency fund acts as a vital behavioral firewall. When the transmission in your car inevitably fails, or you face a medical expense, that cash buffer ensures you don't have to finance the crisis on a 22% credit card.
Right, or liquidate your long-term investments.
Exactly. It protects the integrity of your compounding system.
Okay, step 4.
Step 4 is to invest consistently in broad, low-cost index funds. This removes the cognitive load and the behavioral risk of trying to pick individual stocks. You are simply buying a microscopic slice of the entire economy and letting it grow.
Set it and forget it.
Yes. And finally, step 5, aggressively avoid unnecessary consumer debt. You keep the backpack of bricks off your shoulders entirely.
Okay, but there's a catch, right?
There is always a catch.
Okay.
The final overarching requirement that text places over this entire 5-step system is the most difficult one to execute.
Which is?
Extreme patience.
Yeah.
The mathematical reality of building wealth is that it's a multi-decade process of continuous incremental decisions. It is not about generating massive returns next quarter.
So what does this all mean for the listener applying this tomorrow? When I look at the mechanics of this playbook, it instantly draws a parallel to physical fitness for me.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, like tracking your expenses is exactly like weighing your food and tracking your macronutrients.
Yeah.
Setting up automatic contributions to an index fund is the equivalent of showing up to the gym for your daily workout.
And neither of those things are particularly glamorous.
No. In the day-to-day execution, it feels incredibly mundane. You check your portfolio after 3 months of diligent saving, just like checking the mirror after 3 weeks of the gym, and it feels like absolutely nothing has changed.
The feedback loop is agonizingly slow.
Exactly. But the physical and financial transformation that occurs over a continuous 10-year period is mathematically undeniable.
That conceptualization really hits the core of the issue. It's the relentless consistency of boring habits that ultimately produces extraordinary leverage over your time and freedom.
Boring is beautiful in finance.
It really is. The source brings the entire analysis to a sharp conclusion here. Your income level determines your current standard of living, but your underlying behavioral habits dictate your ultimate wealth.
Back to John and Sarah.
Exactly. John possesses the income to be incredibly comfortable and visibly flashy today, but Sarah possesses the behavioral systems. She is the one quietly accumulating the actual power and optionality that defines true wealth.
It requires a total paradigm shift in how we view the numbers on our paychecks. Let's quickly recap the structural mechanics we've explored today.
Sounds good.
We started by dismantling the illusion of the high salary, recognizing that a massive top-line number means absolutely nothing if it is immediately consumed by the treadmill of lifestyle inflation.
Right.
Then we examine the behavioral cost of delaying investments and the mathematical dominance of time in the compounding equation. We redefine assets and liabilities through the lens of cash flow. And finally, we unpacked a 5-step system designed to strip away high-interest debt and replace it with a framework of resilient, patient capital allocation.
And that framework provides a clear, actionable path out of the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle.
It does.
However, analyzing this text raises a fascinating macroeconomic paradox that I think is really worth considering.
Well, I like where this is going.
The source flawlessly diagnoses how relentless consumerism, constantly upgrading phones, financing larger vehicles, inflating our lifestyles, how that is the exact mechanism that keeps the individual household broke.
Right. It's terrible for the individual.
But if you zoom out to a systemic level, what happens if every listener suddenly adopts Sarah's playbook?
Oh, wow.
If we all drastically reduce consumption, drive our cars for 15 years, and hoard 20% of our income into investments, what is the impact on a broader economy that relies almost exclusively on continuous, aggressive consumer spending for its growth?
The economy would grind to a halt.
It might.
Mm.
Are the structural requirements for building personal financial independence fundamentally at odds with the demands of a consumption-driven economic engine? It is a deeply complex paradox to chew on the next time a highly targeted algorithm serves you an ad for a luxury upgrade you don't actually need.
That is a staggering shift in perspective to end on. Like, are we meant to build our personal wealth at the expense of the consumer machine? Or is the consumer machine actively fueled by the sacrifice of our personal wealth?
Something to think about.
That intersection of individual behavior and systemic design is exactly why we do these deep dives. Thank you for joining us today in unpacking these mechanics. Before you instinctively authorize that next lifestyle upgrade, take a hard look at your financial baseline. Ensure you aren't willingly strapping on a backpack full of bricks, and ask yourself if it's finally time to step off the treadmill.